Well, good evening and welcome to Have We Got Planning News for You. Can I please remind you to consider making a charity donation in lieu of a registration fee? The charities we support are on our website, havewegotplanningnews4you.com. We are delighted today to welcome Lord Marvin Rees, former Mayor of Bristol City for 2 terms, now a member of the House of Lords, and we're delighted to welcome him. And Sasha will be leading an interview with Marvin in the second half of the show. But Marvin, can I start by asking you, where are you joining us from this evening? What, if anything, are you drinking?
I'm in Millbank House now, just across the road from the House of Lords. I'm not drinking anything because I went downstairs to the cafe and it's closed. So I'll get something after.
Not for want of trying. Well, Marvin, thank you so much indeed for joining us. I'm really looking forward to hearing Sasha's the discussion Sasha's going to be leading with you in the second half of the show. And for the panel, Thea, where are you this evening?
I'm at home in Shropshire, Charlie, and I'm drinking water. It's terribly boring, I'm afraid, but there we are. And good evening, Marvin. Absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Chris.
Nice to meet you.
I am in week whatever of the Sittingbourne inquiry that is getting even longer every week. We sit here and I'm drinking water because it's really, really hot.
Cool. You look like you were at Scarborough.
So I'm actually at home in County Durham, but this is the first day that apparently people have been advised not to go to the beach at Scarborough because it's too hot. The first time in my 58 years on my hometown. So how could I not publicise that? And I'm drinking water. Cheers.
Climate change has a few upsides. and Sasha, you're a Landmark.
I am at Landmark. I'm in Fleet Street, central London, and I'm having tea to reflect the general theme of today. And it's lovely to welcome Lord Rees onto the show.
Absolutely. And Charlie Banner here. I'm actually in Edinburgh this evening. I've come up there and just out of reach is a little flask of whiskey, which my hotel has laid on, but it's probably a little bit early for that.
Right. Well, good evening, everyone. I am going to we've got a couple of cases, 3 cases. First of all, Paul, let's have Paul's news update, please.
Thank you very much. Well, here is the news for this week. So I've got 4 items of news. The first of which is that the friend of the show, Victoria Hills, Chief Executive of the Royal Tower Planning Institute for the last 7.5 years, a star in our firmament, has announced that she is stepping down later this year to take up the role of the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institution of Building. We wish her every success, and obviously there's an open invitation to her successor to come on the show. But she's been an amazing chief exec, promoting the RTPI, and yes, she'll be leaving big boots to fill. Second item for the news: there are changes afoot in terms of process in PINs. For some authorities, they'll be aware of this already. For 5 local London boroughs, they have already had a fully digitised appeal system, which has been piloted by PINS for a short while. Gloucestershire County Council and Gosport have followed suit in relation to digitising their appeal service. And PINS have now announced that they're going to roll out across the whole of England that same approach in relation to, firstly listed building appeals, then hearings, and then by December of this year, inquiries and enforcement cases. They've produced a video which is well worth having a look at, just in case you're not sure how we're going to do it, but changes afoot. There's also been announced a simplified process for written reps, which is being rolled out. Simon Ricketts, who I'll be mentioning again in a few moments, has produced an interesting blog in that regard to explain how it's going and to explain how that may or may not work. Third item of news: government really are, I think, starting to get a bit fed up by the fact that performance in terms of delivery has not gone as well as they had hoped. So on the 30th of June, William Bergen, who, as you all know, is Director of Planning at MHCLG, told the House of Commons Public Accounts Committee that government intends to use performance measures to improve the speed of decision-making significantly by local planning authorities, and specifically discourage repeated unwarranted extensions of time being granted. In fairness to William Bergen, he seemed to recognise that most applicants, where they're asked for an extension of time, are faced with an iniquitous choice of saying, well, no, and I'll end up with my application refused, or yes, I will. So the pressure is, of course, massively on the applicant to extend time. Well, having announced last month that some local authorities, so St Albans, Uttlesford and Chorley, have had their designations of being put in the naughty corner lifted, and therefore their decision-making power restored in full, central government has, having noted an uptick in their performance, what Mr. Bergen has said is that the government will not be slow in relation to other authorities that are simply not performing properly in that regard. How effective that will be, who knows? But seemingly in those three respects, it has been. He was also asked at the same committee meeting, about a report by the National Audit Office about dissatisfaction about the use of viability assessments to minimise affordable housing provision. So we may see some change in relation to that. And you will note that the long-awaited guidance on viability, the bit of the PPG, which we were told would have been published by the spring, is now to be published as soon as possible. That's only 6 months late. You'll recall when we had Joanne Abley on earlier on this year, we were also chasing her with regards to the flood risk PPG as well. And one has to say, there is a need for government to pull its finger out in relation to PPG publication, whilst also telling authorities to pull their fingers out in terms of determination of applications. And then my fourth piece of news relates to the annual planning law survey. And with all the caveats one has to put forward about the reliability of such surveys and what they actually mean, all the same, it would be wrong to allow this opportunity not to pass, to congratulate our own Charlie Banner, as we congratulated Chris for the last couple of years, for topping the somewhat opaque role with honourable mentions in dispatches for other Have We Got Planning News for You presenters as well. The most significant element for me is that whilst the top 10 silks in the planning law survey are all male, with Melissa Murphy and Maura Gellis being the top-ranking females at 16th, things look a little brighter in terms of gender equality when you look at the other polls for the more junior members. So half of the top 10 under 35 members are females, so there is actually gender equality in that, and the majority of the non-silks are female. I think it's 7 of the 10 non-silks are female. So it's a long way from saying that the tide has turned in terms of gender equality at the planning bar, but there are certainly positive indications in that regard. And on the solicitors front, congratulations to Town Legal, Simon Ricketts topping the poll yet again, as well as Westminster City Council for topping the leagues of respectively private and public sector solicitors. So we enter interesting times. Anyway, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very interesting news roundup. Now, let me please ask Chris, could you tell me about your case, please, which I think takes us to a certain part of Surrey.
It does indeed. I think it's only right to mention that the top of that juniors list was one Thea Osmund-Smith, joint with Rebecca Clutton. Well done, Thea. Entirely deserved for both you and Rebecca, if I may say so. Right, I'm going to talk about yet another Greenbelt Greybelt case. And if we bring this case up, what we can see is it's a proposal by Beyond. It used to be Ryden, and Beyond Homes have an application in at Tandridge District Council, and the proposal was for 270 dwellings, and it also provided land for a primary school as well. Outline application, all matters reserved, and the issue in the case was that most of the criteria for a Greybelt site and the golden rules were met, but there was this discussion about whether it's a village or a built-up area. So if we turn to the first paragraph that deals with this, David Prentice asked the question, is Smallfield a large built-up area? sort of ironic in the name, isn't it? Planning practice guidance states that when making planning judgments about whether land is grey belt in relation to Purpose A, villages should not be considered large built-up areas, and it is a village. Neither the framework nor the guidance provides a definition of large built-up area or village. The question of whether Smallfield is a village is therefore not a large built-up area is a matter of planning judgment, and this approach is consistent with the case law. So how did Inspector Prentice go about addressing this issue? Well, of course, the first thing he did was look at the development plan. So if we look at the next paragraph, he said, to my mind, it is relevant when making that judgment to have regard to the development plan. He looked at policy CSP1. It addresses the location of developments in settlements as defined by Category 1, which are described as the existing built-up areas in the district. Category 2 settlements, which includes large rural settlements such as Smallfield and Greenbelt settlements. And the policy includes the following: there will be no village expansion by amending the boundaries of either the large rural settlements, which of course included Smallfield, or the Greenbelt settlements. And so clearly aligning it with a village. If we go to the next paragraph, the inspector says it follows that in terms of the core strategy, a village may be either a large rural settlement or a greenbelt settlement, and the supporting text refers directly to Smallfield, saying there is likely to be some redevelopment proposed in the village, and refers to villages at Smallfield and Lingfield again. So you'd think it was a foregone conclusion, really, and the most obvious place to look in a planning context would obviously be the development plan. If we carry on to the next paragraph, he said, in my view, the development plan as a whole provides a clear indication that Smallfield is a village. However, it's not determinative because it predates the provisions of the framework and the guidance that are pertinent here. So the council are obviously saying, well, the development plan is historic and predates the MPPF, and therefore we need to look at this again. And the council drew attention to a Greenbelt assessment, no doubt their own, and this formed part of the evidence base for local plan. And ultimately was not taken forward. Nevertheless, it is a material consideration. Well, it's difficult to exclude anything as a material consideration. And guess what? In the Greenbelt assessment, it says Smallfield is a built-up area. And herein lies the entire argument. So the council relied upon this. How did the inspector deal with that? Well, look at paragraph 23. He says, although the text does say that Smallfield is a large built-up area, it can be inferred that the authors believed that it was because they were carrying out an assessment of the parcel against Purpose 1, which was to check the unrestricted sprawl of large built-up areas. Although that is a factor which supports the council's position, the weight to be attached to it is to be tempered by the fact this document was never tested for examination because the plan did not proceed. So there's a nice sting in the tail there, if you like, from the inspector towards the council, where you didn't progress the plan, so you can't really rely upon that. Moreover, it predated the recent changes in guidance. So in effect, you can run your idea that the plan is out of date in terms of keeping up to date with the MPPF, but equally, this document predated the guidance as well. So it's perfect logic here, really simple, and hopefully an approach to be followed in many other cases. Finally, if we just look at the last paragraph to highlight, 28, his conclusion, drawing it all together, I conclude that Smallfield is a village. Mindful of the guidance, it cannot therefore be a large built-up area. I acknowledge that it is one of the larger villages in the district, and I can understand why the council identified it as a semi-rural service centre. How, in my view, those characteristics do not elevate Smallfield from being a village to being a large built-up area. And I think that is an entirely sensible conclusion. He found harm to the character and appearance. There were lots of issues raised by locals, but overall, granted planning permission, and that will be very welcome to Beyond, which is an SME builder.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Now, Thea, I think you've got a case involving a bit of water.
A bit of water, yes. Sasha, in a change to the originally published programme, I'm not going to be talking about a site in Tiverton any longer, as splendid as the decision of Tom Gilbert-Waldridge, Inspector Tom Gilbert-Waldridge is. And of course, go and read that. But what I'm going to talk about, because everyone will be aware of it by now, is the decision of Inspector Owen Woodwards, which was issued on the 27th of June. And that's in relation to a Gladman site in Kent for 250 dwellings. And I'm covering this because it's big news in respect of flood risk and sequential testing. It's a bold decision. It's a decision which is based on common sense, and we really like those. And it's a decision which asks, what is the actual harm here after mitigation? Because when else do we ignore mitigation in considering a scheme? It also doesn't treat a policy conflict, even where it relates to a footnote 7 interest, as leading to an automatic refusal. And we've seen that that's been the consequence elsewhere of sites failing the sequential test. Now, this case follows the Yatton decision, which was Charlie's case, in which the inspector, also David Prentice again, found that the proposal didn't pass the sequential test there, but that there were a number of factors which reduced the weight that attached to that failure, like the fact it was in a sustainable location, and it was inevitable that future housing would come forward in the plan area in areas at risk of flooding. In this case, there was no sequential testing at all. The site was at risk of tidal flooding in the future, and there was a surface water issue too. But what was the harm? That was the question that the inspector asked from paragraph 22. What was the harm of the failure to carry out a sequential site assessment? Now, the areas affected there were relatively limited. They included part of the main access road and about 20 homes. And the whole site could be made safe, and this is really crucial. The whole site could be made safe from flooding by measures to change the land levels and also include flood barriers. And so importantly, at paragraph 25, the inspector concluded that there was no real-world harm arising from the failure to carry out a sequential test because the development would be safe for its lifetime. And isn't that a refreshing approach to ask where there's a policy conflict, how that manifests as a tangible harm beyond what could be considered a technical breach of the policy? What is the policy really trying to achieve? And the inspector got down to the nuts and bolts of that. That, of course, didn't mean that there was no harm to weigh in the planning balance. And on the negative side of his balance, we see that at paragraph 90, the inspector said significant weight was given to the conflict with the framework and the development plan, but he also gave moderate weight to the flood risk mitigation that would provide a betterment for a nearby scheme. So not only was this site making itself safe for its lifetime, it was going to assist nearby development as well. And on the application of footnote 7, how that applied to this scheme, the inspector said at paragraph 101 that although the proposal had failed to perform the required sequential test, there would be no real-world effects after mitigation is taken into account. A strong reason for refusal based on flooding must, to my mind, go beyond mere technical conflicts, even if they're important. There must be substantive risks and harms that go beyond policy. Now, this is a case you probably guessed already that there was a housing land supply deficit, albeit that was around 4 years, so it wasn't the worst deficit we've seen. But substantial weight was given to market housing and affordable housing individually, as well as further weight to economic benefits, environmental benefits, and so on. So you can begin to see that when that's measured against the significant weight that was given to the failure to carry out a sequential test, that it's very much outweighed by those benefits. It's also a case where there was some heritage harm as well that weighed in the planning balance. So it wasn't like this was a straightforward site, but what we do find is a very straightforward and helpful appeal decision for anyone who's grappling with particularly surface water flooding, which is everywhere, and the need to carry out sequential testing. So hopefully, I would like to think this will precipitate a quick change in national planning practice guidance. We can all cross our fingers and hope for that, and we can all stop talking about flooding real soon.
Thank you, Thea. I think the most impressive thing is while you were talking about that case, Chris didn't run fleeing from the room when you mentioned Swale Borough Council.
Because I was in Swales now, and it was in this room that Owen Woodwards listened to the evidence. We had the two inquiries together. But I mean, Thea, you're absolutely right. What a common sense approach that is.
Yeah. How long have we been saying in appeals, okay, there's a technical breach of policy, but what is the harm? That's what we're really interested in, isn't it? What's the harm for communities, for the environment? Where does it take us?
Absolutely. Well, here. Let's hope it survives, frankly. And well done to the inspector for his bravery. So, right, now let's conclude our cases with Charlie's summary of his case. And Charlie is taking us to a High Court case involving Bellway and Durham Council.
I'm going to talk for the second episode running about a solar farm scheme. And that's actually no coincidence, because one of the morals in this particular story is the considerable weight that the Secretary of State gives to the benefits of such schemes. This particular decision was the grant of a DCO on the 19th of June by the Secretary of State for Energy, Security and Net Zero, Ed Miliband. The case concerned what was known as Oaklands Farm Solar Park Project, which was in Derbyshire. The Secretary of State agreed with the inspector in granting the DCO, including with compulsory purchase and acquisition of rights. And the key considerations of the Secretary of State were the urgent unmet need for this kind of project as established in the National Policy Statement, EN1. That was given very considerable positive weight in the overall planning balance. In relation to decommissioning, there was a lengthy passage in the Secretary of State's conclusions reflecting the consideration the examining inspector gave to this issue. The Secretary of State had requested further information to give him reassurance that the information provided included redacted letters and covenant agreements with landowners, which had been redacted for commercial confidentiality, as well as the unredacted versions for the Secretary of State to have regard. The Secretary of State decided not to take into account the redacted information on the basis that it wasn't made publicly available and consulted upon. But nonetheless, he considered sufficient information in the public domain had been provided to show how decommissioning would be secured, how the land would be returned to the beneficial use of the landowners following the end of the lifetime of the project. He also considered that the management plan, which would have to be approved in due course for decommissioning, would provide the relevant local authorities with a sufficient opportunity to participate at the decommissioning stage to ensure their concerns about decommissioning would be addressed. There was a lengthy passage in the decision about effect on agricultural land and food production, as there was in the previous decision I covered in the last show. In relation to those issues, the Secretary of State was indicated he was aware of concerns about the amount of agricultural land being used for solar farms and the concerns this could have for the implications this could have for food production. He then set out his reasoning in considerable detail, concluding that the use of best and most versatile agricultural land for this project only represented 0.003% of BMV land in England and 0.66% of the land in Derbyshire, and 0.5% of the BMV land in South Derbyshire district. Overall, he considered, therefore, that the use of BMV, particularly given it was temporary, was acceptable. He also had regard to cumulative BMV, both locally and regionally and nationally, and considered that was also acceptable. In relation to the overall balance, the Secretary of State concluded that there was an urgent need for development of this type. He attributed very great positive weight, about as much as you could give, to the urgent need. And he, from the starting point that the national need for the development as set out in relevant national policy statements was a given, he didn't consider that national need was outweighed by the adverse impacts, having regard in particular to the scope for decommissioning and the agricultural land considerations that I've highlighted. So yet another indication, this time through a DCO as opposed to a planning appeal decision, of the very high weight that will be given to the benefits of such schemes, and a fairly strong presumption that they will be granted in order to meet the UK's net zero ambitions.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And as any of you who are assiduously listening to that can tell, that is not Durham and Bellway. Unless Bellway have a secret line of solar farm development, it's completely my fault. But Chris and Thea will laugh. Well, Chris will laugh particularly. I've got to admit, mea culpa, and we've covered about 400 to 500 cases in the 5 and a bit years we've been doing this, and I have managed to break a new trend of trying to do the same case 2 weeks running. It's completely my fault. and I reveal I'm very human. So that's my boo-boo.
Well, I tell you what, you choose every week. People don't know this, but you choose the cases every week, and that includes looking endlessly at which ones are interested. You do all that homework for us. So really, we need to thank you. And who doesn't get it wrong sometimes?
Well, thank you. That's very kind. I think actually we've ended up by hook or by crook with 3 fabulous cases and appeals this week, haven't we? So let's now, frankly, move to the interview. And I assure everyone who's watching, it really is one of our more interesting interviews with someone who's been at the absolute coalface of local governance in the past 10 years. So can I introduce the interview with Lord Rees? Okay, well, let me start to introduce you to the show, and thank you so much for coming. It's really, really important and wonderful to have such a significant political figure, obviously very significant in the history of Bristol, a city that's very warm to my heart. My mother lived there for 20 years, and my wife's family were all educated in Bristol, so it's a very special city, and it's lovely to have the mayor that you have been for the last 2 terms. I'm just talking a bit about the introduction. You grew up in Bristol. I think it's fair to say you did a variety of roles, including working in the NHS in mental health. You also had a period as a journalist, from what I see in relation to your professional career. You also went to Swansea University for a period and was an undergraduate there, as I understand it. Following that, as I said, you had various jobs, and then took an interest in political life, stood for mayor, and obviously got elected very successfully in your first term, and you also, even more impressively, were voted in for a second term with nearly 57% of the vote, which is incredibly impressive after 1 term. There was as I understand it, that came to an end in 2024. However, subsequent to that, as we all know, you became a member of the House of Lords, and where you currently reside, and no doubt your political career will continue in that forum. So we're really, really pleased to have you, and I think it's incredibly impressive what you've done in your political career. Now, obviously, we'd like to ask you about your time as mayor and also your exposure to the planning system and your thoughts on the planning system. So the first thing I wanted to ask you, the planning system in Bristol and what you felt over the 8 years you were mayor. What do you consider, on reflection, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak, of the planning system as it related to your time when you were mayor?
So it was something I wasn't really aware of before I was elected. That sounds strange. When you get elected, you bump into all these professions, right? Adult social care, children's services, planning. And so we came in with a commitment to getting things done. I mean, it was very, very simple statement. And we put at the front of that delivering homes, which is delivering physical stuff. I think what we soon bumped into was a whole mix of challenges. One is a local authority that hadn't really built homes for a long time. And that was, in some sense, to be honest, wrapped around a bit of a culture. Not everyone's complicit in this, but a general culture in which people try to minimize the risk to the point of inactivity, right? If we don't do anything, we don't take any risks. And so you had this kind of jarring of cultures of my mayoral leadership with my cabinet driving delivery with an organization that was a bit stuck, and lots of private developers were telling us that. They said, you need to put a flag up, you need drive, political drive. So we came at it quite simply, really. Right, we're going to build houses. I'm prepared to put my name by it. We'll give it political cover, right? What do you need from us to get it done? But by the way, before you start this journey, we want affordable homes. So let's all be clear at the start. We know you need to make a return. We want affordable homes. How do we sort that out? And then let's get going. So particular challenges with planning. One is, which all local authorities are going to say, is capacity, right? Skills capacity. So while I may have been frustrated, I have to respect the fact that we had high levels of sickness. Because we were, we wanted to build 2,000 homes a year, at least 800 affordable by the end of my first term. That takes a lot of work. And when you're asking people to take risks they haven't taken before, that brings incredible pressure. And you do have to take care of your workforce. And if they're not in, they don't get things done. But then we bumped into the kind of the framework whereby it seemed to be very easy for very small politics to get in the way of very big delivery. It's the way I phrase it a lot.
So we brought forward a scheme, for example, for Hengrove Park, 1,400 homes. And it's the kind of classic local councillor leaflet material, a Save Our campaign held that up, right? For just the system did not allow us to push that through. We got it through in the end. And there needs to be checks and balances. But there seems to be a lot of opportunities for people just to jam the system up.
Welcome to our world. And then tell me about your view. I mean, do you think housing in Bristol and its availability is improving as a result of your time in office? Has it improved? And what would you do to improve that situation even more into the future?
Well, it's better than it would have been because we were so clear. And I paid a political price for delivering homes. I actually went for selection in Bristol to run for Parliament. And one of the criticisms I heard was, we just want to build houses everywhere. So, well, one is, that's like describing football as chasing a bag of wind around a field. I do want to build houses, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Yeah, that I think that good quality homes in communities that people can be a part of, get to know their neighbours, build a base, is the single most significant policy tool we have at our disposal for a whole bunch of outcomes. Employment, economic growth, educational performance, skills development, cohesion, population health, mental health, physical and mental as well, and resilience in the face of extremism. I think it is the policy tool. So we drove in on that. We paid the price for it, but we got homes built. It did not solve the housing crisis within the city, and Bristol is amongst the least affordable of all the core cities, and we can see the consequences of that playing itself out through gentrification within the city, burgeoning temporary accommodation costs, and I would say a background of social friction that kind of populist politics can play off of.
Paul, do you want to ask your question?
Marvin, delighted to have you on the show. You were the Mayor of Bristol at the time of the toppling of the statue of the odious Edward Colston, which perhaps gives you a flavour as to where I stand. As a result of the decision of that, decisions were made to change the planning system and bring in this presumption of retain and explain to statues. Do you think this should be a matter for the planning system, or is there a better approach, such as a mayoral review informed by a panel of relevant experts, as some have suggested?
Well, I'm automatically go to the mayoral reform. I don't think it necessarily needs to be either or. One can inform the other. But in Bristol, what we did around Colston was I set up a history commission because there was a lot of contentions around what did Colston stand for and what should we do. So I got a bunch of historians together from the university to basically run the data on Edward Colston, right? So whatever we earth, it will tell you who this person was and what he really stood for, and this would be valid. It was chaired by Tim Cole from the University of Bristol.
Yeah.
Now, I would say to people at the end of that, you can support Colston if you want. Just be honest about what he was. And if your value set means that you would support someone like that, that's your business, right? But let's have, if we're going to have the public discussion about it, it can't be just done in the abstract, and it can't be seen to be imposed from on high, particularly now, I would suggest, with this kind of rise of populism. But you have to have the kind of local capital and local emotional and, dare I say, racial cultural intelligence to be able to run a process like that, and we had that. From there, you can inform maybe the planning process that this needs to be part of any review of, monuments in a place. And I said at the time, by the way, I can't condone statues being torn down. I was the mayor, but I certainly don't think we should hide from the discussion of who we choose to celebrate. And statues are celebration and not history tellers.
Yeah, but they also have other messages. I was in the US during the time of Charlottesville, so I have to say, all power to your elbow. So thank you very much, Marvin. And apologies, I'm going to have to drop off now. Thank you. Thanks, Sash.
Thank you, Marvin. Back to it. I'm afraid I shouldn't probably, well, I will admit it. My daughter, who was at Bristol University at the time, went on that march that day and was there. So, yeah, she felt very strongly about it. And I think that reflects the views of the young. We're very, very strong about that. So can I go back to, one of the issues we wrestle with a lot in the planning system is the involvement, for the reasons you said, about the political cost of supporting development and housing in particular. Do you think that it is, do you agree with the Labour Party's desire to try and reduce the influence of politics in planning by making more decisions open to officers rather than members? Is that a trend that you support or disagree with?
No, I would support it within a framework. Because again, it's a sensitive time at the moment, isn't it? Right, and people need to have the sense of agency. I think that the loss of agency is one of a whole bunch of factors going on at the moment that's playing out in people's kind of rejection of what they might call the establishment, whatever that is, and whatever they mean by it, or whatever frustration they're expressing. So, what we don't want to do is undermine democratic process. At the same time, what we have to recognize is that democratic processes and kind of what you might call tokenistic, opportunistic consultation, almost populist opposition, as it were, to housing delivery can really exploit the systems we have to the point where they're harmful for other people. So when I stood in a hall in an area of Bristol with 400 people literally hating me for wanting to regenerate what we called Western Harbour, which is an area of kind of land covered by a bridge and flyovers that wasn't used for anything. We could put 2,000 homes in that patch. I had that. What I needed was a degree of immunity, which the mayoralty gave me, actually, to be able to continue to pursue the scheme, having taken into account local objections. But remembering that local scheme was not just for local people, that was housing for the people right across Bristol, including the 2,000 at the moment at that moment in time that were in temporary accommodation that weren't at that meeting. So to give political leaders some cover to go to when they are pushing forward housing would be important. And I'll share with you, I won't mention a name, but there was someone in a very prominent political position who let it be known he wasn't even going to go near housing because it was too costly. Now, I thought that was awful. That's incredibly selfish politics. You should take the hit to solve a social problem, right? The hit that's the price you pay, all right? But to think that some politicians dissuaded from delivering homes in what I think is probably the central crisis in our country in terms of holding it together, we need to take action to give them that cover, and some more officer power could offer some of that cover.
Well, I think you're pushing it, as they say, an open door, because I think all of us on a weekly basis face the consequences of the housing crisis in affordability and availability. So you're to be commended for your approach in this forum. Can I then ask, how do we, though, one of the problems as you said earlier, is about resources. Most local authority planning departments are really struggling. As mayor, you obviously had to look at the whole cake and the division of resources. How does one ensure that the planning departments get adequate resources to fulfil their statutory function? Because it is a real problem currently.
Let me put a bit of a little kind of joke I share. It's not really a joke, but and maybe it's amusing the way I put it. When I was in office, in Bristol, you could have a protest every other week, right? And people come and they protest public toilets, parks, libraries. No one ever came and protest for planners and lawyers and accountants and project managers. And it just shows the superficiality. And actually, no one in the chamber, none of my elected opposition ever campaigned. They never said, hey, we need to put more resources in planning. So one of the points we'd often make is that, in that political battle where we were trying to protect frontline services again, right? Nice mantra, but it comes at a cost, because it means that what you do is you hollow out that backroom capacity. Then when you need your systems to work, that all lives depend on, your planning system and other, that you don't have the skills in-house to do it. So that's how critical it was, and that's how squeezed it was during austerity. That backroom capacity was the hidden cost of austerity in many ways. I shared with Homes England, and we had a good couple of chief execs that I got on well with, Nick Walker and and Peter Denton when I was there. But I constantly urge them to enter into a long-term relationship with us. We can't just have a relationship that's based on 2-3 year horizons. If we're going to think about rebuilding our cities, which we need to do, and it's about housing and all the infrastructure that goes with it, we need to be looking at 15-20 year plans, at least. Right. Now, if we know where we want to be in 20 years' time, then let's work our way back. What do we need to do to get there? And what do we need in place to facilitate that journey? Just have a really, frank and blunt conversation between local, regional government and national government, and then resource that journey. I was part of the Urban Futures Commission that the core cities, I chaired that with Andy Haldane. And we had 3 simple questions, right? What do we need cities to be? All right. What are cities? What do we need them to be? And how do we get them there? And to me, that was part of being very real about they need to have more housing. It needs to be affordable, all the rest of it. And then that third question, how do we get there now? That's the deal to be done with central government. You don't get there for free. So how do we resource that journey? And it's not, by the way, I don't want to break my 2 minute, but I don't like talking about the spend. And when we talk about that, it's not spending, it's investment, because it brings you a financial return, both in increased productivity, I believe, but also in reduced costs to things like services that kick in where people don't have homes and societies begin to disintegrate and kids need extra support at school and mental health is poor. So let's be real about the level of investment that's needed to deliver the cities we need.
It's very interesting. Now, what can I ask after, obviously, you were at the forefront of a very significant debate about Colston. The thing I want to ask you, and Paul's touched on it, but what approach personally do you take to the built environment, and whether it be statues or buildings that were obviously built in a very different era and moral time? I mean, do you think the planning system should actively seek to remove those buildings and statues which frankly now are morally repugnant in the 21st century, or should we let history be history? What approach do you advocate after your Colston experience?
Well, certainly not in an abstract. So I'll give you a context. Again, this would take a longer conversation because things are contextual, right? If there's a decision made in Whitehall, Westminster, to set a planning system in place to remove contentious memorabilia, celebratory statues, and so forth, it's gonna be a nightmare, right? So what you say? What was the proverb? African proverb: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Right. So we're trying to take our country far. So you have to find a way of bringing everyone with you, but not moving at the pace of the slowest. Right? That's what I described Colston. It's a high wire act. It really is. So you can't. I don't think you could just say to the planning system, "That's what you got to go and do." So, quick anecdote. After the statue got pulled down, there was a counter rally in Bristol the week after. Football firms and Hells Angels. Right? People were labelling it far right. I knew it wasn't simply far right. It was too complex for that. Shirts off, tattoos out, Union Jacks on the wave, and so forth. Right? So I went to meet the organizer of that. I promised him I'd never tell the media at the time. It wasn't. We'd only done it after the fact. But, we talked on the phone first. He said, "Listen, I'm not far right." I said, "I'm not saying you are far right." All right. So anyway, I go around his house and we, talk, have a really good conversation. All right. I said to him, "Look, what's going on for the guys that turned up at the rally, the counter rally?" He said, "They feel like they're losing their city mark." I said, "They are losing it, right? But they're losing its house prices, is gentrification." He said, "Yeah, I know, I get that." So one is the backdrop to all that social instability that could be seen as threatening far right was a housing crisis. I'm not saying that's all it was. I mean, people have bad tendencies some places, but housing crisis was a big one. But add to it this, right? They feel like they're losing their city. And then a group of people, many of whom didn't necessarily come from Bristol, walk through the middle of the city, pull down a statue in front of police on camera. It feels like chaos. And then that statue becomes emblematic, whether or not, and someone told me, excuse my name, they didn't care about the cost of the statue. It becomes symbolic of their loss of purchase in this country, right? Which is happening in terms of they can't no longer afford to live in the communities they used to live in. Now, there are lots of layers to it than that. But a central edict to say get rid of it, I think would be unwise. you have to facilitate those local conversations, and it has to be done with local authority. And when I mean authority, I don't mean command and control authority. I mean legitimacy, because you've been meeting the needs of local people. You can have that conversation.
Absolutely. Right. Well, why don't I open up the floor to my compatriots? Christopher, what question do you have?
Christopher, that sounds very serious. Sasha? Marvin, I've followed you for many years. Thea and I are in Chambers in Bristol. We're in London and Birmingham as well, but we're on Queen Square. And it's a city I love, although I don't love the traffic trying to get out at 5 o'clock on a Friday. And you are speaking, if I may say so, nothing but sense. Absolutely. And very brave, actually, in what you're saying. Maybe easier in the House of Lords, like Charlie, but it's just wonderful. It's wonderful to hear you talk in this way. I just want to put one point to you, though. I'm very familiar with Bristol and what's going on in South Gloucestershire and the whole of the West England, and my clients brought the plan down in the West of England. That won't have been very popular with some people, I think. But I did a site, an affordable housing site in Bristol. I won't say where, and then it got rubbed out because people thought, oh, we want to oppose that. And it was nothing but affordable housing. And to me, the system is intractably broken. It's just, you can't mend it. Politicians can't solve this. So my question is this: you talk about planning and talking about Homes England, having short-term conversations. I totally agree. And you should look 15 to 20 years. Absolutely right. But politics doesn't work like that, because you have to get re-elected every 4 or 5 years, and so do national politicians. So isn't it the time to recognise that and take the politicians out of housing? We took the politicians out of Bank of England interest rates, and everybody thought, well, politicians have to set interest rates. And then we took them out. And now professionals do it. Why don't we just make your life easier as politicians and just take the politics out of it and let professionals decide how much housing and where it goes?
That's a really interesting challenge. That's all right. By the way, I go back to your transport point. Knowing in Bristol, you know that I did try and drive through a mass transit solution that included underground.
And it was brilliant. It was brilliant. Everything you've done is brilliant. But are the politicians really just getting in the way of housing just because of the cyclical nature of it?
Some are, yeah. I mean, there's a number of ways you can come at that, and I'll probably forget some of them as they roll around in my mind at the moment. Right? Politics that gets bunged up in short-termism. Sometimes we let the electorate off the hook here, by the way. I think sometimes we get the politics we deserve. And sometimes politics is actually a distilled reflection of what we are. Short-term, selfish, and so if they wouldn't be selling it if we weren't buying it, right? Yeah. So when we complain about politics not delivering, sometimes we need to look at the very nature of our, not just the electoral cycle, but the electorate and what they reward and what they punish. So it's not necessarily good for the, getting elected, but I think I've reflected on that quite a bit. I certainly think that what we tried to do in my discussions was to have an evidence base. So, for example, when I went down, and I'll name it, I went down to Hot Wells, right? And there'd been some trolling, and we had Western Harbour. We could put 2,000 homes down there, 7-minute bike ride from the city centre, 25-minute walk, fantastic location, waterfront back into use, put the flood defence in at the same time. It's great, right? So everyone's, Marv is ignorant. He doesn't listen to people, that, the usual kind of stuff. Now we're going to bring him in and give him a mic. So I said to the room, I promised I'd stand on stage and not say anything for 50 minutes. So I literally stood on stage. Everyone told me I was bad. Then I said, look, when I spoke, I said, look, rather than starting at the point of disagreement, why don't we find out at what point we disagree? Do you agree that Bristol has 480,000 people living in it? Yeah, we do. Do you agree that number's growing? Yeah, we do. Do you agree we need to build houses? Do you believe we have a housing crisis? Yeah. Do you believe we need to build houses? Yeah. Do you believe they need to be real houses? Yeah. Okay. Right now we're on the same page. So the question is, where do we build them? Do you want to sprawl, or do you want to build on brownfield sites in the middle of the city? Well, now you're getting into the territory. I think too often people are let off the hook. they're allowed to oppose, but they're not asked to live with the consequences of their opposition or come up with a viable alternative. And that's and then the challenge for me as a politician within that, by the way, is then it falls on my shoulders to challenge that. And that doesn't go down well because then you're seen as adversarial and aggressive. But the journalists don't do it, right? Journalist is like, oh, this person says A, this person says B. Hey, look, there's a fight. Rather than, well, let's explore what the consequences of A and B are if we don't build homes. I'd be sorry. Go back to your question, Chris. I'd be loath to totally take it away from politicians because I think there's something important about genuine political leadership and democratic accountability, as opposed to disembodied processes. But certainly, I think there needs to be more of the professionalism in it that saves it from the winds of political change. And like I said, those opportunities for very small politics to get in the way of very big delivery. How we do that, I do some more thinking. But it was certainly a source of frustration for us when we put the flag up for housing.
Please stand for Parliament.
You already ejected twice.
Just keep going.
I'm not sore about it.
Marvin is in Parliament now. And with Charlie, they can have a serious effect. Now, Thea, your question, please.
Yeah, thanks very much, Sasha, and hi again, Marvin. And it kind of follows on from Chris's point, really, because you said, I was really interested here, you paid the price for the delivery of homes, and that's really a really sad indictment, isn't it, for the electorate? It's turkeys voting for Christmas. You're getting delivery of homes and all of the good stuff that you've explained that brings with it, and then you were voted in again as a result. And we have a government now which is pro-growth, pro-delivery. It's doing some really big stuff with the planning and infrastructure bill. How does this government avoid the same consequences that you suffered for the growth that it's trying to promote?
It's a big question, because quite often what we found in Bristol, in the city of there used to be a joke in Bristol that everyone was an MC, and I think by the time I came to my time in office, everyone was an activist. I in the city of activism, I think in some sense it's inevitable that skylines are going to change. This is one of the points I've made. You can't bring the city, you can't bring a 1980s Bristol to 2020 challenges. So one of the things I would say to the people around politics is part of your job is to make it possible for more radical, more delivery focused politics to be possible and to be rewarded. So praising government publicly when there is opposition to house building, and laying out the consequences of non-delivery versus delivery. UK cannot be the same as it was 50 years ago if to live in this century. But I don't see much of a downside, to be honest, for government, because every person who gets a home will know they got a home because it was driven by a Labour government. And I went to visit homes of people, and I would tell the story, and it was go down well. I went to visit families we built homes for. I remember one family, they moved out of the tower block in Barton Hill. I looked at their two children. I thought, geez, everything this family's life has gone in the right direction. The mental health, educational performance of their children, the life success of their marriage, solar panels on the roof, the affordability of life, their success. Everything's just gone in the right direction for them and for society. And I think it's an incredibly powerful story to tell. I mean, to be honest, I would have made house building the top mission. Not me to contend with the wisdom of the top team, but a national vision built around that old song, the Englishman's home is his castle and all that type of stuff. This is going to be a country which people can afford to live in, and we're going to just turn the machinery into delivering that in communities where we know each other. I think it's a powerful, powerful national vision, and it fends off the predatory populists who just prey on hopelessness, I think.
Charlie?
Thanks, Sasha. Marvin, I want to ask you about the levers of government, because the powers that you had as mayor were subtly but importantly different, for example, from the powers that Andy Street had, and in turn, Sadiq Khan's powers were different too. That, from your experience, what's the most important power that a mayor needs to have, whether or not one that you yourself had, in order to deliver housing and growth in their area?
Oh gosh. Now, we'll bounce around in that one a little bit, because to be honest, some of the powers we did have, we didn't necessarily have the resources to fully to deploy them and exploit them. So we got CPO power, right? And we had people onto land. There was a famous building, old hotel, smack in the middle of the city. It's been derelict for years and years. Every time we went to try and take it, they do some shenanigans and take us back to square one on the CPO, right? So our capacity and skills, and to be honest, a little bit of a backstop so that we could take risks. So the taking legal action for us is incredibly risky because we just don't have the spare capacity to lose. But if we had a bit of backing to be able to lose a legal action, we could take more legal action and press more where we needed to press. So that would be incredibly significant for us, adequately resourced to make use of the powers that we do have. But where we did bump into a couple of areas that kept coming up was the powers around land assembly and land value capture. So when we started off down the journey of Temple Quarter, which is one of the biggest regeneration, or most exciting regeneration schemes in Europe, right? Over 10,000 homes, 22,000 jobs, $1.5 billion to the city region economy. We saw land starting getting purchased and we were not in the races, right? As people started to acquire land because they could see it coming. And it was painful because I was angry because it was our political leadership. And I mean our, not mine. It was our political leadership driving that with collaboration from the Combined Authority, University of Bristol, Homes England, Network Rail. And then suddenly people start jumping on and taking advantage of that. It was painful to see. It would have been fantastic if we could have moved quicker and kept all that value increase for the public good and to transfer over into delivering affordable homes and all the rest of the things we wanted in there.
Fascinating answer. Thank you very much.
By the way, I will just add to that. There's something that doesn't cost much that I've been out for a year, but I'll tell you, right? Temple Quarter, massive scheme. I was at MIPIM in 2018 and I stood on the government stage and it was how exciting this scheme was. We didn't get the decision to support Temple Quarter, the 95 million, until I think it was 2021, 2022. Every year we're talking about this scheme and we could not get a decision out of government, including someone who's going for leadership at the moment with opposition. But I just said, please just give us some certainty because you kept us in a state of imbalance for all that time. We held our partnership together. Peter Hendy, we had Nick Walkley and Peter Denton all coming and staying around the table. But we were living in this limbo just because we could not get a decision out of government on whether it was going to support that. In the end, they did, and I'm thankful for that. But they could have done that 3-4 years earlier.
Yeah. The wheels of government do not go particularly fast. Hopefully they'll speed up. Sasha, back to you.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And Marvin, can we all thank you collectively for an absolutely compelling and gripping interview? Genuinely, we have a lot of guests, but I think what you've been saying is so interesting. And particularly, I think what you said about objectors not having a consequence of any kind for their position is really revealing and very, very insightful. So thank you, truly. Back to you, Charlie.
Thanks very much, Sasha. And thanks again, Marvin, for a really insightful interview. That's all we got for today. We are back for the last episode of our summer series on the 17th of July with Councillor Shanika Mahendran, who is the Councillor Cabinet Member for Planning and Placemaking and Democracy at Milton Keynes City Council, a place which is seeing remarkable transformation and change at the moment. So we're really looking forward to hearing from Shanika in the next episode. That's all tonight. Cheers.